the New Zealand Tech Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.
Greetings and welcome along to the New Zealand Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Spain. Today we have Ivan Khmel with me. Great to have you on the show, and also Jordan Browne. So first time for both of you, so thanks for joining us.
Great to be here.
Cool, great to be here, thank you.
Ivan, maybe you can just give a little intro where you fit into this sort of big wide world of tech and education and so on.
So personally, I teach at Media Design School and I'm a program coordinator for the Bachelor of Creative Technologies. I've been with the school for 10 years now, and prior to that I used to work as a visual effects artist at Pickpock in Wellington.
Cool. And Jordan?
Yeah, we work together at Media Design School. I'm the program director for a number of courses in AI, IT, but primarily it's been game art and game programming, which is a pretty exciting industry here in New Zealand that I think is sometimes a little bit of a sleeper, but I'm sure we'll get into that a bit later. But yeah, it's great to be on the show, and yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, well, no, great to have you both on the show, and also I think it's the 25th anniversary of Media Design School, so that's pretty exciting and pretty impressive. So we'll look forward to delving into a little bit about Media Design School later on during the show. But I think today we're really keen to delve into probably quite a lot of AI related news. But first up, big thank you to our show partners, to 1NZ, 2 Degrees, Spark, HP, and Gorilla Technology. And a little bit of local news as well. So we've been reading that there's a bit of demand. We've learned around sort of pressure on the government to tax Netflix and the like. So we're talking about the producers who they get tax breaks and public funding, but there's this pressure, I guess, on the incoming government to maybe change how that works for the streaming services. You guys sort of have any thoughts on where we should head in these regards?
There's a little bit of a precedent which they've done with the GST on digital goods services. For games, that's a big thing. In the past, we didn't pay tax on Steam games, which is kind of crazy to think now. So there's definitely a precedent for it, and if there's a need, I could see that it would. We don't want to kill our local market because everything is offshore, but at the same time, I also think, the great thing about living in this day and age is the open access we have to so many things, the barriers that have been pulled down to be able to engage with media and content that you never would have been able to. I think back to, late 90s, early 2000s, like someone coming over with an imported DVD of a movie that never got released here would be kind of a really big deal. So I think there's probably a middle ground. There's some fairness, but you definitely don't want to sort of stifle our access, because the whole sort of region locking of 7 different regions and different IPs and what's released here and not available on this store. Yeah. I personally would like to see that open up a lot more and be able to take full advantage of the fact that everything's connected and that what we can do with the internet.
Yeah, so the idea of putting an extra tax onto Netflix and Disney Plus and Apple TV so that we can help fund our local sort of film and TV industry, could backfire. There's, I guess there's
miss a release maybe here because it's not going to get enough viewership to justify paying the regional licenses for our country. So, yeah, I guess it's probably really what are other countries doing, and are we following suit? Because we tend to be a fairly small fish in that sense, right?
Yeah, I think this came out of the Screen Producers NZ or Sparta, as they've been known, out of their event where they've been pushing this thinking. My regular concern when we look at sort of extra taxes, and we looked at for Amazon and so on and the like, is usually the negative impact is usually actually on the Kiwis. So, if you get an extra tax on Amazon, it's not as though Amazon get any less money. It's just they pass it all on to New Zealanders, right? It's like, so you turn on an Amazon tax and go, we're going to charge you, X percentage of turnover, or you add something onto Netflix. Netflix will make sure that what they pocket off each subscription's the same. And generally speaking, I'm sure there are exceptions where there are economies that are some of the weaker economies where they're competing in a different sort of manner, where yes, you can sign up for video streaming for $3 a month and things like that. But generally you're talking of sort of an economy like New Zealand or Australia. These things just get passed on, so it ends up costing us more and making life more difficult for consumers.
Yeah, and I saw that there was a bit of a call to try and, as part of that conversation, also have more New Zealand content on some of those platforms, which also makes me think, because I think there was a pivoting point a few years ago where Netflix was the sort of de facto name for streaming, right? Like, let's watch on Netflix. But these days, how many, you would probably know better than me, we got Prime, Netflix, Neon.
And look, you've got the broadcasters themselves with TVNZ on demand and so on, and I think we will see continued movement in this here. I'm not sure what the sort of sweet spot is in terms of and if there is, in terms of the number of platforms, but it's certainly probably more complicated than what it once was, but it's not that hard to jump in and out of the different services.
Yeah, exactly.
Either.
So I kind of think that if we're talking about let's get New Zealand content on Netflix to take our local media around the world, that's definitely a good thing. But if it's the conversation is to let's put our content on Netflix so New Zealanders can watch New Zealand content, I'm kind of like, well, why use Netflix? Like we can have our own service, because it's become normal to have 5 or 6 different platforms that you're watching on.
And I think ultimately taxation is always going to be a very crude lever, and it's one of the few levers that the government really can pull in one or the other direction. So even if the heart's in the right place to try to get more New Zealand content and support it in that way, it's always going to please some people. It's always going to upset somebody as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, look, it's a challenging one, but yeah, as you say, the government doesn't have a lot of levers to pull, and this is one approach that will be encouraged. So by some anyway. So we'll see how that plays out. Actually, we're still in a position of waiting for a new government to land. We have had the launch of the Technology Investment Network's Top 200 company report, and it was indicating our tech sector has earned 17.1 billion in export revenues through to June, so the year ended mid-year. And look, I think that's really encouraging, and there's been a bit of commentary through from National Party from Judith Collins, and it's suggestions that we may be going to get strong support for sort of broader tech sector, or stronger support under the incoming government. I usually take those things with a bit of grain of salt, because the grain of salt they give here and then take away somewhere else. So we will see how those things actually play out. But it's encouraging to see the tech sector sort of continue growing, and in the years ahead it will be we've been told that the way it's heading. Tech becomes our sort of number one export earner, and of course that generates sort of questions in itself: what is and isn't tech, and so on, right? Because the threads of technology run through everything, and even if we look at our dairy exports, there's more and more tech becoming involved, obviously, in that. So every area of industry all our exports, rely heavily on technology as well, even if we're not directly exporting the technology.
I think the frictionless part of it, I mean, this is obviously a pretty old argument of, it's not often a physical good as well. It works to our advantage, being
Definitely.
the smaller population when you look at
When
the
we're a
world.
long way
So,
away, and
in a way, I'm sort of like, when we're going back to the tax conversation, I kind of think it's in our advantage to keep that process as frictionless as possible, because we're probably going to win out in the end if the way that tech, media, copyright laws go, that makes it easier for us to make stuff in New Zealand and get it out there to the world. We're kind of benefiting from that as well.
Yep.
Whereas sort of trying to restrict it a lot more, we're probably just doing ourselves more harm, because our population is the size of a city, somewhere else. We want to make it easy for our stuff to get out and other stuff to come in. So
now on to, I guess, the kind of the big topics for today: artificial intelligence, AI, and really the big story that's been evolving, I suppose, over sort of the past 72 hours or so, has been that of OpenAI, and initially the dismissal of their chief executive, Sam Altman. I think caught probably just about anybody that read about it on Saturday New Zealand time by surprise and bewilderment and shock. It was quite interesting, sort of watching the different things being posted over the weekend. And interestingly, we've seen a bit of a move away, some audiences from Twitter, or X as it now is. But really, if you wanted to follow this story, it was all happening on X, and pretty much all of the key players and people, or a lot of the key players and people very close to them, were sort of posting out onto X. That was really the first place to read about it and see the different commentary, and there were audio rooms opening up where people that were in the know and pretty influential in Silicon Valley were jumping on and discussing some of these topics pretty quickly, which is interesting as we're sort of going through some changes with the makeup of the social media world, to see that X still holds a pretty key position, certainly there in Silicon Valley. But yeah, so that was the first thing, was Sam Altman exiting, and then he was sort of effectively co-founder as well as chief executive, and we had Greg Brockman, co-founder, there as well on the board, and working in OpenAI, who then what was he? I think he's the president. So yeah, he stepped down, and you sort of started to see that there was a bit of an alignment, and a lot of people that were supporting Sam at that point. And I guess when we look at the broader picture of OpenAI, started as a non-profit to hopefully steer AI in a sort of good direction through their research and so on, and then they've launched a commercial entity in order to develop technology, and also you need that commercial entity if you're going to seek traditional sort of style capital raising, which they wanted to do. And we're told they raised about $10 billion from Microsoft for a near 50% sort of ownership of that commercial entity. But as of Saturday, we considered OpenAI to be worth somewhere in the region of $80 billion US dollars, and that was something that really came through because of, in many ways, Sam Altman's sort of leadership. Obviously the rest of the team as well, but he was spearheading that, and that was a reflection of his background at Y Combinator, where many startups have been through and had raised many billions of dollars. So really fascinating, kind of looking at the story, And then there seemed to be this opportunity where maybe Altman and Brockman would actually come back to OpenAI, and it was on X that we saw Altman, sharing his picture of himself holding his visitor badge at OpenAI and saying, "Hey, this is the first and last time I'll wear this," which was a little bit of, I guess part of the pressure was being put on at that stage that the board needed to resign and they needed to make a decision very quickly. I think there were some deadlines there. None of that came about, and so we kind of land where we are at this very moment in time, and it could have changed by the time you listen to this if it's delayed. But where we are now, where there does still seem to be a slim chance of Altman coming back, but what seems more solid is that Sam Altman, Greg Brockman, and likely a lot more of the team will be moving to Microsoft, and that deal seems to have been done and made pretty public. So there's quite a lot to to delve in there in terms of did the board just get this totally wrong? Have they got the wrong people on the board to start with? Where are the misalignments? What's gone wrong? And how will this play out? Because I think if we look at the last year, which has kind of been the year of generative AI, it's been so much of it has been about OpenAI, GPT 3.5, GPT-4, ChatGPT has become the thing that everyone's talking about. And now there's suggestions that maybe 90% of the staff of OpenAI could exit and follow Altman and Brockman out the door, maybe to Microsoft.
I mean, for a market that's emerging and so competitive, you've got to wonder, what did they think he was going to do? When he's gone, right? He's not going to be, getting a job at Starbucks. So they've surely accounted for that. Well, you would go.
Well, it kind of looks
company,
like they didn't, though, doesn't it?
It's such a. See, I think about that. The public conversation around AI is already very foggy. There's a lot of people who are misinformed. There's a lot of people who have very strong opinions for or against how the technology should be used. And you've got someone like Sam Altman, who is essentially a public figure who I think is probably like an empathetic bridge for a lot of people who don't know a lot about the tech. Like, you can see him talking on podcasts, on interviews that are not at all aimed for the tech industry. They're aimed at the public. So to lose that public figure, especially in a way that's unclear, because it would also be very different if there was a clear mistake and they sort of open with, this thing has happened and this is what we need to do. But in a space that's already foggy, letting go the public figure in a very foggy way, it kind of makes you wonder, how much of the position OpenAI holds is because of who they are, or it's, the people in there. I think of, when thinking about like video game industry, computer companies, there are so many old operating systems and different companies that were sort of vying for like a public share that you look at now and people wouldn't remember that they ever existed. And it's because there were 20 horses in a race and one or two are the ones that kind of came up. And, OpenAI may have been the company we're talking about this year, but in 10 years, there may be an Apple or an IBM or someone completely different that we're not even aware of yet. So I don't know. It seems when you're ahead of the pack, it seems like it's just such a big risk to take.
I think it's fascinating as well how our fascination with technology is always coupled with a big personality, right? Whether it's Henry Ford and the Ford Motor Company, Carnegie Steel, Andrew Carnegie, I believe, right? And same thing here, even though the technology is very different, we want to put some kind of a face to what it is. And that face carries quite a bit of weight with the public and also with the employees of a particular organization as well.
Well, we were talking the other day about Atari. You should talk about that, because I think it's like the exact same story in a way.
at a certain point, I was listening to an audiobook about history of video games, and at a certain point, somebody in the sales team in Atari decided to boost productivity in the company, that they were going to share information as to which games sell the most. And when they published the list and showed it to the entire company, it was clear that 3 of their main game designers were making all the games. They were making essentially 80% of the revenue of the company, which made those game designers realize that they could potentially have opportunity for negotiating their salary upwards. And when they encountered the CEO, they were told that everybody in Atari matters, everybody from putting together the computers to designing to making the art and programming the games as well. At that point, due to that decision of publishing that list, the 3 head game designers left Atari and founded Activision. And to me, it's fascinating that the intention of publishing it, we need to make more of these games and not those games, actually backfired and essentially gave these 3 game designers a cue that they could go on to do something of their own.
How much of that money, that confidence, that team is going to walk with that person who's the one everybody's seeing at the head of it, right?
Todd McFarlane, comic book illustrator, inventor of the modern look for the Spider-Man, left Marvel Comics to start Image Comics with some of the top illustrators from Marvel as well, because he had the talent, and then he took his name and everything that went with it as well.
Yeah, it can be sort of probably a two-edged sword. The having a well-known leader, can't it? But yeah, when you look at OpenAI, it certainly seems as though Altman has the backing of the very large majority of the team, which sort of makes sense. The team are likely to be mostly connected back to their chief visionary, which is their founding chief executive, much more so than to the board members, right? Tend to have that sort of connection. And so, and particularly when we look at the sort of cutting edge areas that they work in with artificial intelligence, I think you probably look across their relatively small team, 700 or so people, and imagine, well, any of them could get a job probably wherever they like, to a degree at the moment, and that might mean the large majority of them end up at Microsoft.
Which is interesting too, because they've already got a relationship together. Because
the complexity there, isn't there?
The Bing chat's powered by OpenAI, right?
Yeah. So what Microsoft have is they've effectively licensed, through their partnership and the $10 billion that they've put in. My understanding is that they've licensed basically anything that comes out of OpenAI. So when I do even a business enterprise sort of chat, which actually Microsoft renamed last week, but what was called Bing Enterprise Chat, which is your secure within your own sort of 365 environment, that's using OpenAI's technology, but run by Microsoft.
But now they have the CEO, so it's interesting.
I guess you need more than the CEO, right? Because he's not coding. He doesn't know how it's all how it's all put together. And what we don't know also is exactly what that agreement looks like between OpenAI and Microsoft. But you've got to imagine they're in a very, very powerful position right now.
I mean, if you're going to speculate, it's not that you have the CEO, but if having the CEO brings some of that talent, and it brings some of the funding potentially and the confidence with it.
And if you look even at Microsoft's valuation, which isn't far off, last time I looked, far off $3 trillion US, which is kind of makes your head explode when you recognise that it was, I don't know, certainly during the lifetime of this show, and I think in the probably not too many years ago, that I think it was Apple that was sort of first in terms of companies hitting that $1 trillion market cap. And yeah, here's Microsoft sitting at 2.81 trillion, which I guess if you converted that into New Zealand dollars, we're probably looking at past 4 trillion New Zealand dollars. So, crazy figures. But a lot of that has come, really since they've done their deal, with chat with OpenAI. In fact, you could equate probably a third of that, or actually over a third of that. So $1 trillion of Microsoft's valuation, depending on how you look at it and slice it and dice it, you could say relates to their meager $10 billion that they invested in ChatGPT. So it's kind of mind-blowing. So where do you guys think this kind of could go from here? Because we're still, we're not there in terms of sort of mature generative AI. There was a lot of speculation over the weekend with people saying, has Microsoft stumbled on generalized was it generalized AI?
The more dramatic ones I've seen is sort of like the reason all this is happening is because that super general intelligence is out and it's out of control and it's taking over. And
AGI, artificial general intelligence.
Maybe Sam Altman was trying to put some brakes on it, but they didn't want to. There's some very dramatic takes on it at the moment.
Does that seem like science fiction to you guys? It sort of does to me, right? This idea that we've reached this sort of artificial general intelligence sort of level, and where basically human brains are no longer needed. I just don't think we're about to cross that sort of line anytime soon, and I don't know whether we ever will. To be fair, obviously that sort of AI will likely appear, but whether we get to the sort of singularity type of levels, depending on how you define that, is somewhat unknown. I
think a question to ask is our definition of intelligence at that point, and how much of it is memory and ability to. I would be very impressed. I bring this up at work quite a few times. If somebody can do arithmetic in their head, multiplication, long division, I'm impressed. And I know everyone can do it with a calculator. It's pretty easy. Same thing happens with art. I understand the Midjourney can generate an amazing image within seconds, but I'm very impressed when somebody like Kim Jong-gi could draw something on the wall from his mind just right there in front of you. So I wonder how much of, with these new tools that are coming about, how much more are we going to yearn for the performative element of the things that we do, and also at the end of the day as well, taking responsibility, right? Somebody is going to need to take responsibility for the actions that they've taken based on the prompts they've generated as well. So somebody in the company needs to make the call, right? You can't just say AI told me to do it.
Well, yes and no. I mean, I think there are levels to which we, the decisions are made kind of somewhat autonomously today, whether it's share trading platforms or just the way different businesses operate. But mostly these things are dictated at a sort of human level, and I think, for me anyway, I think we mostly want to stick to that. But there probably are elements where we can delegate some aspects through to AI. I think that it's going to be quite hard to make some of those calls, isn't it? You look at, say, a share trading platform, and if you can put some money into an AI-driven platform that can make you, I don't know, let's say, even twice as much as could be made through a human approach, then probably most people are going to say, well, okay, I'll hand it over to the AI, let it do that job. But we've got to be careful around where you draw those lines, because even decisions around investment will have a direct impact onto individuals. So if enough people were doing that, you could shut down a business and leave a whole lot of people kicked to the curb with no job, because you had AI make investment decisions that have real world consequences.
Yeah, I think it's going to be much like the sort of like dawn of the internet. That's what I like to compare it to more than like a new machine, or some people have said like AI is like Photoshop, and it's just an extra tool. But the thing is, we'll see a lot of businesses that are nowhere near tech when that becomes more and more accessible, not just to use but to implement into your work, into your business. Much like websites, I think we'll see everybody trying to do AI in some way. And the same as websites, we'll find actually a lot of businesses don't really need a website, and some of them are going to create a whole model off of that. So it'll be like an up and down where I think some stuff will collapse, new stuff will come up. I don't know if you can really say it's an objectively good or bad thing. It's a change. And I think that perspective is important for us to have. Sometimes, given that we're teaching art courses and programming courses, that's a question we get asked a lot. Yeah. Is, am I going to do this course, and then is this skill set going to be out of date in 3 years, and I've wasted my time? And my response to them normally is, well, we don't have a crystal ball. We don't know what's going to be happening. And if you're concerned about the direction tech is heading with AI and automation, I think the safer bet would be to learn how to program and sort of be on the tech side of things, because when it does happen, you're going to have a much higher literacy of how this stuff works than other people, and you're coming out with the advantage. It might mean, you're not doing the exact same job you might have been doing 5 or 10 years ago, but there will still be work to be done. So I don't think it's something we're particularly afraid of. For me, the other reason would be that most media that I think really we're consuming is an assemblage of a lot of other things. Like, if we think of filmmaking, there's actors, there's sets, there's lighting, there's CG, there's sound, there's script writing. It's not like we are at the point where you click a button and you just generated a feature-length film that's sound and robust and complete and going to be as entertaining as what people are putting together. That might be a conversation for the future, but I don't think it's quite at that stage yet. I mean, we're not. Well, I could be wrong. I feel like we're not really seeing people who are really into books stop reading books because now I can just say, generate me a story,
Yeah, and I mean, there's a lot of aspects there. When you see the images where there's extra limbs on people and different things like that that's sort of generated by these tools, I kind of wonder what equivalents we will get in different areas, right? So you're reading a story that's been written by AI. Where are the extra kind of literary limbs, that are coming through in the story, and you look at it, you go, I can see what's happened here, or in some video, a movie or something that that's been thrown at an AI to generate. Let's I think we want to. Probably keep a lookout for those sort of extra limbs and extra oddities, because they're probably going to be around for I'm picking a fair while to come. Whether they're there forever, I think that's quite an interesting one in terms of how these tools and technologies will be able to pick certain things that are odd or not. You sort of would imagine that we will be able to, see the technology develop in those regards, but there sort of probably becomes a point where it gets harder to get the technology to go further, though, and this is maybe some of what we've seen with autonomous vehicles over the last few years, where it's like, oh, that looks like it's getting really close, and then, when Musk showed out the Tesla FSD 12 beta, and he's streaming through from his phone, and then the car goes through a red light, and it's like, oh yeah, that's the limb in this example that shouldn't be there. That's the thing that's happening that shouldn't. Yeah,
I mean, it's hard enough driving a car yourself around some of the New Zealand roads as it is. So the slick highway example is one thing, but the practical. Yeah, but also like things might just change. Like I think like communication style is a good example of, in the past, like writing a formal letter and like the unspoken sort of convention that goes with that. We were laughing at work at one of the OpenAI. It was one of the promo videos for ChatGPT or something alike, where it's sort of the person writes 2 lines for their email and then they convert it to be this like nice lengthy letter. But then the person on the other end gets this lengthy letter and they are going, can you simplify this down to 2 points? And much like, text messages and formal letter writing and emails, like maybe we'll sort of develop a different way of communicating where we maybe drop the need for some of that excess because we know that that's how it's being seen. I don't know. I think a lot of the AI stuff, unless you're like explicitly prompting it otherwise, it very much writes like a high score essay with sort of like an aim and then like the thing and then like a conclusion of what that thing was. And it's very wordy, where I think a lot of language being as concise as possible is actually what you're striving for. So
yeah, and that's I think often how we use these tools, right? We'll take a bit of content and say, give me a summary of that.
On that point, and bringing it to the art side of the AI conversation, a famous artist by the name of James Gurney, who is the art director of Dinotopia, he has been maintaining an illustration blog for more than a decade now. And it's a lot of really good content, conversations about watercolor, history of illustration, and various artists in history. And he's created a chatbot on his website where if you have some queries, rather than using the generic search, trying to sift through a decade of content, you can actually have a conversation with an artificial intelligence, James Gurney, and ask him questions. What is the best way to learn watercolor? What is the best way to... And it's a very interesting thing that it's a traditional artist's perspective on the use of AI, generative not in terms of making art, but supporting artists in finding correct content in a timely fashion. I thought it was very clever. It was very refreshing as well to see.
Yeah, it is. It's encouraging to see some of the great uses, of technology come through. Particularly when we're looking at some of the concerns that are raised, I guess, along the way. Now, a couple of other areas I wanted to delve into as far as this sort of broader picture is concerned. One, there's been a little bit of media that came through regarding biometric sort of data control during war in relation to Israel. That caught my attention, and I guess sort of summing up the piece that I read on it. Countries collect biometric data. In Israel, they collect all these things on people, whether it's facial recognition and data or fingerprints or what have you. And then they put in place, legislation that I guess the government of the day, believes that can fly from the general public are comfortable with it. But then something like the current, war that's going on takes place, and then you've got a scenario where a government can start making arbitrary decisions. And most countries seem to have these mechanisms to sort of flip the rules very quickly if there's a war, there's a pandemic, there's a what have you, there's some sort of crisis, state of emergency, that you can sort of flip the switch and at that point what a government can do can very quickly resemble what we might expect of an authoritarian government. That was kind of the way it came through, and I'm mostly I hope using their words, they certainly reference that sort of the authoritarian government sort of type of approach. And I just thought, that's an interesting kind of joining up the dots from a situation where we might be we might be quite comfortable to then a situation that again you might feel like this is justified. We're at war.
I mean, it's when we're making laws around privacy and data protection, it's not making it for this government or next government. It's making it for 5 governments down the line, and you can't peer that far into the future. So that is a little bit scary, isn't it?
Well, I guess it's highlights that we put a lot of trust in in our governments and in our leadership, and most of the time I think when in Western democracies like New Zealand, we can have a pretty good level of trust for our governments, but you can't guarantee that it's going to be the same forever, though, I suppose.
So there's a couple of points I want to make on it. Like the first one is linking back to driverless cars. Let's say driverless cars are just everywhere now and everyone's using it as their main mode of transportation. And in New Zealand, we're going to have a much lower road toll than we currently have. Less people are dying. There's less car accidents. It's overall safer, but there are still going to be 50 or let's say 10 even driverless car accidents a year. And I feel like the emotional weight of that accident was not just caused by a human mistake. The person was tired, they fell asleep at the wheel. It's sad, but it happens. When it's now a driverless car has done that story now suddenly feels so much more heavy. So there's a hard kind of balance there of giving up some sovereignty of data. Does it overall make society better? But there are going to be cases where information got out that maybe shouldn't have. That maybe there's going to be a misuse of power, and that's like a pretty tough one, I think, to weigh up.
Yeah, I think in New Zealand, because we've had, we've always been considered to have lowest level sort of corruption and so on in the world, be a very sort of trustworthy country. You would kind of think, kind of wherever we go on these things, that we'll make good decisions that are good for everybody. But I think what we've seen over the last few years is things can get quite sort of polarizing in society, and we've probably seen, the US probably more so than anywhere, where it seems very close to sort of 50% with one views and close with often quite opposing views, and not so many people that kind of actually are sitting sort of in the centre and going, oh yeah, I can see how that stuff aligns and those things sort of align and so on, and yeah, I can see these sorts of topics are probably going to become a bit more polarizing, over time, because they're, whichever way we go on these different things, you end up missing out on some benefit in one area, but then you bring in some other benefit depending on, which way you balance these things.
In connection to the AI conversation as well, when the internet was being relatively scraped for art to be used in art generative models, there isn't as strong of a case for IP protection for art as there is for music. So there was a lot of large legal firms protecting the right of IP for musicians and artists, musical artists. And for that reason, the AI companies were very careful as to what music they were going to use for this. And I wonder, with this biometrics conversation and the conversation being about privacy, I wonder whether it's going to go in a direction that my biometric data is my IP, and I would want to know how my intellectual property is being used, by who, when, and how. And it's kind of a different route to the same conversation in some way.
It's interesting, because I think it could also go the other way, where our definition of sort of privacy actually just evolves to probably be a bit different than what it is right now. And like the example I would give would be when photography came out, there were people sort of superstitious of cameras, like, is it capturing your soul or something by doing that? Maybe you don't want to have a photo taken. With social media,
there are still people that sort of respond in a similar manner today.
Yeah, well, social media, you're for, I guess, people who grew up when that came out, the thing your parents would tell you is, hey, don't just put up your photo on the internet. Anyone could look at that. And like for them, that would be a really big deal. But then the generation coming through, there's like, oh, no, it's just normal. All my friends have photos of it. If I don't like it, I'll just delete it. It's, and so I sort of think about data privacy there, where the reason we have that is because, I'm living in a small town. There's 500 people there. I am a receptionist at the police office, and you did something a bit silly last night. You maybe you got a little bit rowdy or something, and you had the night in the cells. And now I'm going to go tell my friends who are maybe also friends with you or someone at your work, or so we need some privacy there, because what if I get it wrong? What if it's a rumor? But that's because that data is so individualized that it's about you, the people you know, to your situation. But when we're talking about a large data set that is so unfathomable, I think it's almost a reframing. It's not the same. If we're recording it in a way that I can't track it back to you and where you live and what you did, but I'm using some of that information for something that people would all, I guess, agree is like a common good, like the GPS in your car letting you know when there's going to be heavy traffic because it's checking everyone else's car and how far they're going. I think most people are, they're clearly fine about it because everyone's using that tech.
We may not think about it too much. I think we've seen in the past, we have seen some scenarios where that seemingly anonymized data, actually you can join up the dots between it, and suddenly you know things that, you shouldn't be able to figure that out about that person.
Yeah, you can figure out my patterns. Or,
or you saw a US military base and Fitbits, I think it was, where it was like a bit of data got put together and then it's like, oh, okay, that was an unintended consequence. So sometimes these things will have those sort of surprises and their unintended consequences, and I guess you could even link that back to the in these scenarios those incorrect limbs sort of in a way that like
I guess the
things gone
question
wrong.
I'd ask then is because I suspect it might happen like this, that a lack of data privacy may become normalized in the same way that it's now normalized to post pictures of yourself and your friends on Instagram. And yes, sometimes somebody downloads those pictures and makes a fake profile. Sometimes someone uses that information to do something nefarious.
Yep.
But by and large, the population has accepted that that's like just a normal thing to do. And I wonder if in 20 years, maybe less, maybe in 10 years even, that the generations coming up are just going to see data like a footprint of like, of course they tracked me. That's how I'm kind of curious about that. It's a reframing of privacy. I think it might happen a little bit.
Yep. There's probably a whole lot deeper we could go into these, but we might have to save that for another time. A couple of other things I wanted to mention. YouTube are experimenting with AI-made media, which I think there's that could be really fascinating in terms of how that that could end up playing out. So drawing on musicians content to effectively kind of clone their voices in different ways. So there's a bit of work going on there by YouTube, sort of testing that stuff at the moment. Based on their model Luria, and anyone that sort of heard me giving a futurist talk this year is more than likely has sort of seen me demonstrating some of that technology where you put an input in with some audio and they apply this AI to it, and the way I usually demonstrate it is with a audio wave on the screen. And you've got a point in time where it flips from what was normally human generated and what was AI generated, and as it crosses that line, you can't tell where the AI's got involved. So there's some pretty interesting things coming through there. So they're able to take a text based prompt and an audio snippet, and then basically replicate these different artists. And one I heard the other day, somebody pulled together, might have even been on LinkedIn, like LinkedIn or Twitter or something, was somebody, I think they had linked the sort of David Attenborough AI, and then that was looking at a video of them as a person commentating and describing them in the wild and their environment and how they attract a mate and all this thing based on what they were wearing and the background and stuff where they were in their home and so on, and it was quite entertaining. So there's this element where these things are entertaining and interesting, but then there's those elements around what does this do to our creativity and
hopefully it
how's it going to
ignites it
play
though.
out?
Like it used to be that to record music you needed a professional studio, you needed tens of thousands of dollars worth of equipment, and now anyone can do it at home. Anyone can get a laptop. I do a bit of recording, and some of the virtual instrument simulations are so good that it's like people would just use that now instead of picking up a guitar because the quality is that of a professional studio.
Or better.
From your laptop. So you can say on one hand, like, okay, that's now there's going to be like less roles for session guitarists. Now, studios are going to go out of business, but it kind of hasn't been the case because I think music's a great example of technology just birthing more innovation. So like entire genres based on things like electronics and sampling exist because that technology is more accessible. So I don't really see that as a bad thing. It's funny, I saw a video, I might have shared it with you. The Gorillaz song, Clint Eastwood. I saw a little short video of how he came up with the music for that. It's the default Rock 1 preset on the particular keyboard that he had, and it's like the entire instrumental of like a song that's made millions, and it's sort of like if that were generated by AI or if it were just a preset, like does it really make a difference? In a way, I think we're just going to see things evolve, and maybe we'll see even more things happening because as that technology reaches more people, again using the music example, maybe some people are going to become musicians who wouldn't have otherwise because the barrier to entry was too difficult. Or
and we've seen technology facilitate that in lots and lots of different areas. Professional photography, good camera was $10,000 plus by the time you got a few lenses and bits and pieces, and then you had to be able to figure out what was going to land on the film after it was processed and spend huge amounts of money. Now you can grab a device at all sorts of price points, and you can get better very, very quickly. If you put the time and effort in.
I think what it is, and again, I think it's something we've chatted about, but I think it's the speed that on a transition to like a good example of photography is like modern DSLRs and how well they can shoot in low light. If that just had have come out of nowhere in like the mid 90s, like that would have just like disrupted so much. But because it was a slow transition of like for quite a while, like there's advantages of the older tech, and maybe the new tech's really expensive, so the other one's more affordable, and people, whatever the thing is, if the transition happens over 10 or 15 years, I think everybody makes it. But when the transition is seen to be happening, like if I'm not someone thinking about AI, if I'm not someone in the tech space, and I've been just sort of running my studio and doing music production, and the first time I hear of it is like, hey, look, here's like an auto-generated song that sounds better than what I'm making right now. That's why it's scary. If I heard like the very primitive version of that, and it's like slowly getting better, and I'm starting to use some of it in my work, and then a decade later I'm like embracing it a bit more, I think that's palatable. But yeah, the speed at which it's hitting is, I think, the part that makes people concerned.
Now let's talk Media Design School, since that's where we've got the privilege of hearing from you. Both been involved there for the last decade. It'd be interesting sort of just to sum up for those who don't really know who Media Design School is, who you are, who Media Design School is, and and where Media Design School sort of fits into our different sort of educational institutions in New Zealand, because we have our traditional universities, and then we have I guess varying other often sort of private entities, and polytechs that
Yep.
tend to be sort of more down the practical perspective. But yeah, where does media design school fit in? Who wants to tackle that?
Yeah, I've always sort of seen media design school almost in between all of those things.
Yeah.
It's interesting. We are a school that does visual effects and animation. We do games, we do media design, and we are a private school, but we are offering degree programs. Whereas I see a lot of private providers are sort of a bit more focused at like the diploma level, or like, bridging people into, and then they're going to do something else. And of course you have the traditional universities. I came through that and I taught at one previously, so I've got a bit of experience with that too. That I guess the criticism would be that they tend to be a bit less practical. They're quite broad in terms of you take a lot of different things and sort of find your way as you go. I think for us, our main goal is basically to have industry-ready graduates that are performing at a competitive level as they're leaving school. So, the kind of bar is not so much, we want to get people started. It's like we actually want people in the job ideally before they finish the course, but as they're finishing. The other probably big point of difference is,
which is something that we need in New Zealand, right? I mean, we need more skilled people across sort of the varying sort of creative and technology sort of roles. And as a country, we've done pretty well in terms of that growth of the tech sector, the growth of our creative sector, and of course there's a big crossover. Both of you have that connection to the gaming world, which is probably one of the perfect sort of intersects of technology and creativity.
Yeah. And the reason I say we're in between those things is I think you have a trade school that's very sort of like you can go in and you learn the things that you need to do, and you do them.
How to do plumbing, butchery,
and then you go out and work, or you get your apprenticeship, and then you sort of have the creative end of things where it's it can be fine arts, it can be very conceptual. I think this is similar to how art is kind of maybe taught in like school. Sometimes it's like you put part of your identity into it, whereas I kind of see those spaces as inseparable in a way of like learning to make video games, for example. It's very creative, but it's also very, very technical. It's also not a thing of sort of like, oh yeah, you'll learn to make a game in a year and I'll be on my way. It's like, actually, this is 3 years of pretty intense work just to kind of get to the junior stage. But if that's what you're passionate about and you feel very fulfilled by that thing, I think we're serving a need where you can't, I think, effectively learn unless you're very self-motivated, because I believe you can learn anything yourself as well. But if you are sort of your typical student, you can't really go to uni and take 1 or 2 electives, one in game design, one in game production, and sort of expect to get the result that you might hope. You also can't really take a 1-year diploma. You're only going to learn like a sliver of what you need.
Gotcha.
It's really got to be a fairly intensive course that's really focused on
in the best position to be able to drop straight
definitely,
in. Yeah, that's really interesting. And I'm kind of curious in terms of what what you see in terms of students that are coming in, and I know amongst our listeners there'll probably be a mix of I'm leaning more towards parents than students, but there'll be a bit of both. And what I often see is youngsters who are they're not quite so clear on kind of where they want to go. How are you seeing that play out, Ivan, in terms of the people coming in, and then do they more often than not kind of stick to a track, or how much sort of change kind of tends to happen?
Something that we bring up quite often is that games as a course sells itself. A lot of young people like to play video games, so they might think 3 years of playing video games, that sounds like me. So what we try to stress is that we want both programmers and artists who want to work in the games industry to have committed some time in developing their skill to a certain level, almost Imagine showing up to a music school and you've never touched a piano, and you're like, I just want to start here at a university level. You'd have an expectation of a certain degree of competence to a certain level already. There's definitely jobs in New Zealand in the video game sector. Pickpock, the company in Wellington, is approximately 180 people. Grinding Gear Games, which is a game studio that made Path of Exile game and is in West Auckland, they have 180 plus people as well. The games industry is growing, and there's people all over the world playing games that are being made right here in New Zealand. So
good.
For creative young people who want to have a career, there's definitely a career in video games. But as Jordan pointed out, it is very technical. You're not going to be able to get through a media design school degree just drawing pictures for the entirety of 3 years. You'll have to learn 3D, you'll have to learn rigging and animation. You might have a preference towards some of those, but it's really important as you go into a role in a games company. The larger the games company, the more specialized you can be. And the smaller the games company, if you want to go independent and make games by yourself from a garage, seeking the runaway success that some indie studios have, you're going to need to be far more generalized. You're going to need to be able to, as an artist, potentially to create a concept for a character, make a 3D model, rig and animate that character, and put the character into the game engine as well. So it is very technical, but there definitely is, for those who are, I suppose it would be an equivalent of All Blacks. Many young people play rugby, but not everyone becomes an All Black. Same thing here. You need to have a really good, strong base of creative potential. Hopefully get trained by a school that has the pedigree of people who are from industry, showing you exactly what you need to know. And then you move into the roles in the games industry. So, and because we're so far away, there's a certain advantage as well. Bringing over senior talent from overseas can be quite challenging for a lot of game studios in New Zealand. So it creates an opportunity for somebody younger to join a junior position and learn from the people in the company and grow with the company. We have quite a few graduates of ours who are occupying senior roles in various organizations, games companies in New Zealand.
But I'm picking there'll be a segment of those students who really they're really driven. They absolutely love what they do. You know, they will come out, and you'll be able to kind of probably see and recognise them through the journey.
Oh, absolutely,
of ones that you can see. They're going to ultimately have their kind of pick of where they work, and other ones where they're not going to be in that sort of same position. It's going to be maybe they're not going to just be as capable or as passionate to achieve the same sort of heights in their careers.
But people are on different journeys, right? And of course, I'm also very much for like access of education, right? Like if you want to learn how to make games and you have no intention of ever working in that, that's totally fine. I mean, that's actually a lot of the university segment is people trying to figure out what they want to do. On that end of like very motivated people, I mean, I've got quite a few stories like that of some of the stronger teams where, you see all 6 people on that team get given a job offer before they're finished.
Yeah, that's pretty
We've
cool.
seen people start their own company and actually sell the game and be successful from that, making their own way.
Yeah.
But yeah, the other thing is, if people don't get work right away, it's a pretty incredible skill set. If you know how to, because on say the programming side, it is a software engineering course. On the art side, you are learning the principles of 3D, of 2D, of everything you're going to need. So you're probably coming out from either degree with, a computer literacy in the top percentage of the country. So we do see that a fair bit too, where someone goes for a different job at a business, maybe in tech, and they go, oh yeah, I'm going to do this while I look for the games job. And then you sort of see them 5 years later and it's like they're still there, and now they've moved up a bit because they've realized their skill set is like a very high demand kind of thing at the moment. If you can use game engines, if you can program, if you can make 3D assets and animations, you're going to be very popular, I think.
Yeah.
The metaphor that I use at our school when talking to students is that any institution, not just media design school, let's say can offer you 60 points of skill, to use a video game metaphor.
Yeah.
And let's say you need 100 points to get that job, that dream job working in a dream studio where you want to go. Some students come in with 10 points and the school will leave with 70, and they need to have another 30 that they need to work after they finish studying. And some people will come in with 40, and then even before they finish studying, they're already having opportunities come to them where they could secure the kind of job that they might want. And then the question is, which institution specializes in which area better? I think we're really good at doing video games, but I'll also be very open to seeing more competition in this space as well, because I think the games industry in New Zealand, it's a very lucrative export. A digital export is a very lucrative export because it requires no shipping.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have the figures on me, but I think the last New Zealand Game Developer Association survey had us a bit over around 1,000 people working in games in New Zealand, and 25% of that is grads from our school, which is pretty cool to be able to be so homegrown.
Yeah.
And the industry here is very supportive of education and what we're doing, and very involved as well, like on a very sort of like classroom to studio type relationship, which is great.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think the one thing that when we're talking about young people trying to figure out if they want a career in this sort of thing, it is a bit hard. The one I like to tell people is, imagine you want to study history, right? Like you're coming out of high school and you love history and you're going to go do a history degree. What are the things that kind of let you know you wanted to do that? I mean, there's a couple obvious ones. You probably like history. You probably enjoy or are good at reading, and also enjoy or are good at writing. Like it's a fairly short list of to know if that's going to be something you're interested in.
Yep.
With games, it's kind of hard. Like most people don't really know, well, what would I be doing? And I think the biggest misconception we see is people who think I was bad at maths, so I couldn't do that. Or the other way, where people sort of go, oh, I wasn't creative enough, so I couldn't do that. It's kind of interesting that people have the opposite reasons of thinking they won't be able to make it. I think a thing that we've learned really is that creative ability and technical skill are both things that you can improve at. It's a shame that I think in school, at least when I was in school, there's very much a narrative of sort of like left brain, right brain, like you're good at that, but it's okay, you're not good at that one, and that's just kind of how it is. Sort of showing that programmers can be creative and design a game, and an artist can become technical and deal with the technical side of, say, 3D in a game engine, is more easily overcome than people might think if you've got the drive and motivation and willingness to try that out. So that's been our learning, is that you can make a game in one semester when you first start. You're a game developer from the day you begin.
Go. That's awesome. And not everybody has to sort of be able to double down in an area that doesn't seem like a natural skill anyway, right? So you can become someone who's doubles down on the creative aspect, doubles down on the technical aspect. Not everyone has to be good at both, depending on what your role ends up being. Is that fair to say?
I think so.
I mean, it's good. Obviously, there's some
definitely
real benefits in having the combined sort of skill set, especially in a market like New Zealand, where we don't tend to have massive companies with sort of hyper specialization. So you need to be able to do be reasonably flexible.
Yeah, that's certain. And I think even if you want to be really specialized and you know what you want to do, having that wider literacy of like, okay, I'm not good at programming, I'm going to focus on modeling characters, but dipping your toe in just enough that you can have a conversation with a programmer is the perfect recipe, I think, for being able to work in a relatively small industry like in New Zealand, because you might not be doing all those roles, but you're definitely going to be working with those people. And I suppose that's the second misconception. I think a lot of people think making video games is a very it's perfect for me because I am really introverted. I don't like talking to people. I kind of want to stay at my computer all day and just do my thing.
He says that after having sat down for 2 hours of chatting around the table, of which we're
it's
sharing
social.
about half.
It's so social. And we see the students who do the best are often the ones who realize that early and get good at communication. It's no one believes you when they're in high school when you're like, so you want to make video games? Well, you got to communicate. It's like, come on, that's really cheesy, but it is actually quite true. You need the hard skill, but that's important.
Yeah. So many more areas we could delve into. It'd be really remiss if we didn't talk about the role of AI in this world. If we didn't just sort of give that a moment. And I know have sort of touched on that sort of crossover into your world through some of the other discussions, but. Yeah. How do
Yeah.
you see sort of things playing out? What's the role of AI? At the moment, did I hear right that that you have you do have some courses that focus on AI right now?
Yeah, so it's quite multifaceted, really. Like, I think first of all, there's just the intersection of AI with education in general, and it's really making institutions rethink how they do certain things. Like we still do figure drawing class, right? And one could argue, why do that? Because you can just find online reference. You can take a photo, like you can get a model and trace over it. So why do that? And the reason we're doing it is not because we're expecting that students are going to be doing that at a studio. It's because we're trying to build a skill. So the first part, I think, of AI in education is understanding that there's something slightly different between education and productivity, in the sense that I might do it the slow way when I'm teaching someone on purpose because I want them to build a foundation, right? So same in programming, we may show a less optimal way to a year one student because they need to do that way before they get the literacy to understand an efficiency later. So I think in the first sense there, it's like schools, including ours, need to be quite clear about what we're expecting from assessments. And there's really no one size fits all, right? Like if the assessment is to test you on your writing ability and your ability to construct a sentence using the language that with yourself, then that's probably a safe bet to say we shouldn't be using ChatGPT for that. But on the other hand, I could be doing an assessment that's not really assessing the writing at all, that maybe I need to include some of my own reflections just on the process, and we're not really marking how it's put together. It's more the idea. And in that case, maybe a teacher would be fine with using it. So it's very nuanced. It's almost, I think for us, we're actually putting guidelines on different assessments about like, you can or can't, use it for this or that.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's going to be a challenge. Things, like tests and things that are sort of trivialized, if they are trying to teach a certain skill, it might mean we need to move how we assess a little bit. But then the other side of things is, because we are working in a creative space, it's also, we need to follow suit with industry. How are game studios using artificial intelligence? Is it really replacing, jobs right now? And I think at the moment people are fairly conservative in its usage, because a lot of the copyright stuff is not completely clear at the moment. It's still kind of evolving. So I would say that some studios are not really using it at all. Others are definitely using it. Others are experimenting with it. But I don't think we're quite seeing, the role in games right now for like a prompt artist, as some people said, would sort of be a thing, because I think it's being used a bit more sort of behind the scenes, and a little bit of development, prototyping, workshopping things, but it's definitely not taking the job of an artist or anything. And as we see some of that regulation settle and consensus come forward, I think we will see it implemented into workflows for sure.
What are your thoughts, Ivan? Are we going to see a whole different world when we've got access to the a sort of a full gamut of AI tools? Do we end up with just a lot more creativity, a lot more content? The efficiency gains means we go from having, and I don't know how many games that are available on the varying platforms today, but I know it's a lot. Do we 10x that number of games and we sort of, end up with sort of smaller followings of each game, or, how could it play out?
I personally think that there's this portion, the challenge and the difficulty of artists adapting to AI is a certain sense of our identity is tied to a profession that we do. So I'm Bob the builder, right? I'm Ivan and I draw. And as soon as technology is replacing that portion of it, the question becomes, well, what do I do now? If I can hit a button or type in a prompt, what is an artist to do? Am I just cleaning up? Am I painting out that additional limb or the additional finger that the AI generated? Is that my job now? But looking at art history, there was a period of art where egg tempera was the kind of paint that was used in majority of the art in the Western world. And then when oil paints were invented and you could smudge them and they dried over a prolonged period of time, the egg tempera specialists felt that it was almost like cheating. How could you have this technique that basically would be very difficult to achieve with egg tempera. You're using oils now. I think there's going to be potentially a separation of people who are very capable. They've done their 10,000 hours, and now they're using AI. And there are some people out there on Instagram who are doing that. They have a very high level of competence, and they're using AI to do certain finishing touches to their art. There's also a potential for somebody who might go down a pathway where they feel like they don't need to necessarily put in the work. I suppose to use a sports analogy, we have cranes which are helping us build buildings which we wouldn't have been able to do in ancient Egypt by just hoisting things by hand. We have the Olympics, but we don't have the Olympics of cranes. So we understand that a crane can lift a very large quantity of weight. I don't even know if somebody said to me 20 tons, I'm like, I suppose that's good. So a person who has the skills will be able to generate, let's say, an art book that they have conjured up, and then they can clean up and they can curate that. And somebody who doesn't necessarily have the skills will assume that they could, and maybe they could get something there, but it's not necessarily going to match the quality of the work that somebody who's done the time figuring that skill out. So I think there might be a greater separation of that. It's definitely going to boost productivity, and then there's basically no hiding from that. But then the question is, why should I go to the gym and lift weights if there's a crane that can lift way more than... It's like, well, there's other benefits to it. And that's to Jordan's example of doing traditional art, life drawing. There's a certain degree of developing your hand-eye coordination, ability to discern color, which is going to help you in looking at AI art and seeing whether it's good or not. But there's a whole host of the part of the conversation with AI art. When somebody is using AI generative models to create concept art that looks like it was done by a person, I can understand why there's it's a very tumultuous place, and people might feel like they're being slighted out of a potential job that they have. Alternatively, though, there's a large portion of art world where stock images are being used in advertising, and they have been. And in concept art world, there's a technique called photo bashing, where you take multiple photos and you collage them together to create an image that you wouldn't have done if you actually had to paint it pixel by pixel. In the process of creating greater productivity, the artist is still expected in the game studio or anywhere else to spend the time that they saved to make the work even better, rather than go on an early holiday. So I think that's another element where, even though there will be a certain boost in productivity, either in the ideation stage or in the polish stage, there's still going to be an expectation from an employer, if they're paying for 40 hours in the week, that you're there for 40 hours trying to improve the quality of whatever art's being made.
Yeah. Either that, or we start moving back to 35, 30, 20. There's all sorts of discussions we could go down there. Look, it's been really great to chat to you. Thanks so much for joining New Zealand Tech Podcast. Bit of a longer episode today, but I think it's been great to sort of delve into some of these topics and to learn from you both. So thanks so much. Now, folks that are interested in just learning a little bit more about Media Design School, where should they go and understand there's a new Bachelor of IT launching for 2024, so that might be of interest, to some listeners as well.
I know we talked mostly about games here, but we have a course in IT and AI and games and film animation, VFX, media design, creative advertising. So there's a lot on offer there, all really techie stuff with a kind of creative edge. Probably the best way is to go to our website, and you can make an inquiry or get in contact with us from there. No,
it's great. It's been really interesting to sort of see how Media Design School sort of evolved, and I'm fascinated to see what will come out in terms of potential graduates to hire from this new one. So that's great. Well, a big thank you to both of you coming on the show. Thanks everyone for listening in, and of course to our show partners, Gorilla Technology, HP, Spark, 2 Degrees, and 1NZ. And thanks everyone. We will catch you on the next episode. If you've been watching the live stream, do make sure you go and find us through Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever your podcast app is. and subscribe to the New Zealand Tech Podcast, or follow us on one of those platforms. If you're listening to the audio, then you've missed out on the live stream that would have been on YouTube, Facebook, X, and LinkedIn. So come and find us on your favourite platforms. That gives you a chance to be able to catch some of the content just slightly fresher than through your audio player. So thanks everyone.
Yeah, thanks for having us. It's been awesome.
you.
Yeah, cheers.
Awesome.
The New Zealand Tech Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.